Hi everyone, I'm Winnifred Lewis, a professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland, and I'm talking to Peter Streker from Community Stars in Australia. Peter's going to walk us through some great advice on avoiding explosive conflict, because I know that a lot of us who are at home with our families have noticed a real change in the dynamic, and maybe things aren't always going that well. So we'll be walking through some general points on calming down when you're overwhelmed with anger and frustration, avoiding the buildup of tension, before any explosions, changing the way you think about triggers, and we'll talk about some strategies that people often use that don't actually work very well at all. And then we'll kind of take a step back and talk about before, during, and after the conflict. And then we'll close with some resources and acknowledgements of many people who have been involved in developing this resource. Peter, why don't you take us through some good advice on how we can help to control ourselves when we're starting to feel angry and frustrated and overwhelmed?
Sure. There's quite a few strategies that I've used successfully with men over the 25 years I've been working with men on this topic, but they could be applied for anyone. The most important thing when it comes to managing these sorts of situations is to learn how to step away from conflict, particularly conflict that's going to be regrettable, rather than stepping into it. So one of the easiest strategies to make that change with is using breathing. So people can take deep breaths to try to calm themselves down and keep themselves composed as they start to feel themselves escalating. The other important thing about this is to try to pick up those early warning signs through body signs. Like some people might start to feel tense in their stomach, or some people may find that their shoulders are rising, or they're starting to feel hot or something. So identifying those moments as early as possible is really critical. So it's much easier to change course when we're 4 or 6 out of 10 than if we're 9 out of 10. Get to that top of that scale, things start to accelerate. So breathing's the quickest method that we've got to calm ourselves down. It kicks in what we call our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our body's nervous system that keeps us calm. The key with breathing is to make sure that the out breath is slow. Like even if we imagine taking a deep in breath, that's actually a stressful thing to hold. It's the out breath that makes the difference. So simple breathing techniques include breathing in for 2, breathing out for 4, or 3 and 6, or whatever pattern people want. But the slow out breath is really important.
And you've got to do it about 10 times, don't you? It's not just one breath. If you do that 10 times in a row, you'll start to feel the change.
That's right. And it also buys you some time so you can think about whether the approach that you were taking was the right one or not.
And that's what that next one is about as well, isn't it? Some people will count to 10 or even 100 to try and just give themselves that time.
Exactly. So what we're trying to do with these techniques is break out of that circuit, or out of that pattern where we're slipping into an angry or an overwhelmed or a frustrated experience. And it's not that those emotions are problematic, it's the behavior that comes with them. So if they turn out to become a nasty insult or an aggressive act of some sort, that's where we have huge regrets, and then we can hurt people that we love. Yeah. So counting is another way of breaking that pattern and stopping, so we can at least think about other strategies that we can use to create a better outcome.
And those next two really are the same, aren't they? They're just different ways of taking a break. Like in one, you put your hands over your heart, which I guess has the benefit of signaling to the other person as well that you're trying to control yourself. It also puts your hands kind of in a posture where you're not going to do anything, and you're thinking about, the meaning of that heart and how you want to, maybe the people that you love, you don't want to scare them or hurt them. So that's a nice thing. And then just taking a break, physically leaving the room, I guess, is what we're talking about there.
Exactly. It's very difficult to hurt someone if we're not in the same room with them. So that physical distancing is really important. Having our hands on our heart was a strategy that nurses taught me from the emergency department. They said that often their patients would come in so distressed that they couldn't breathe because they were breathing was too complicated for them. So they just told them to put their hands on their heart and wait for something to shift. So that's what we're doing, just putting our hands on their heart and waiting for that next notch of relaxation or calmness to kick in.
Yeah. And I think that next one, distraction, picks up on the idea that when you leave the room, it's not about just, being angry. You're really trying to calm down when you're taking that break. And a lot of people have experienced success by putting something on their phone, like a game that's really relaxing, a puzzle game, and just spending 5 or 10 minutes in that immersive experience and really getting your mind out of the conflict that you were just in so that it really takes you to a calmer place.
Exactly, yeah. Or other options could be listening to music or looking at a beautiful photo on your phone, or doing something else that just changes that pattern and that dynamic, so we're not escalating into a dangerous situation.
I guess that next one is pretty obvious, but how calling a friend when the conflict's going nowhere and you just need to take it somewhere else, calling a friend to help you through that tough time.
That's right. It gives you another perspective on things as well. I've often found that useful myself when I've thought that I was absolutely correct with something, and when I've reflected on it with a friend, they've had a very different view of how my behavior might look to other people, or they might have had a different perspective that I hadn't seen because I was so fixated on my own perspective.
Yeah, well, that's right. And we all, in the heat of the moment, can feel self-righteous. It turns out we're totally wrong. We have lack of perspective.
That's right.
Something that increases that greatly is if you've been drinking. And I know that alcohol is one of the strongest risk factors for having conflict at all, and for having terrible conflict. If you have conflict, hurtful words and things you really regret. So limiting your alcohol can be really important if you're going through a period of tension and fighting.
That's right. It almost never makes things better. It almost always makes things worse.
The national guidelines for Australia suggest that you should have no more than 4 standard drinks at any one time and no more than 10 in an entire week. So a lot of conflict can really be traced back to trying to use alcohol to get through a tough time. It's not really very good for that.
No, it rarely ends well if there's a lot of alcohol involved. Yeah, and the police will tell you that too.
Yeah. That try again just is about the idea that, if you've had one hurtful phrase or angry lashing out, that certainly doesn't mean that you should, just let yourself go for the rest of your life. Everyone can practice and improve and keep getting better at how they manage their emotions and how they manage conflict.
That's exactly right. Even people who have been working in this field for a long period of time can always learn new ways of doing things better. There's always new strategies we can use.
What's the oldest client that you've worked with who was able to turn around a lifetime of bad skills?
One person who comes to mind was a man in his 60s who was a bus driver. And I mean, he was in a fairly extreme situation where he was very violent at home, and he radically changed his behavior. In fact, his wife rang us up and thought that she must have married a new man because he was so radically different.
That's incredible.
So it's
really inspirational. I wanted to say that because I know a lot of people have the intuition that it's kind of like set in stone, and if you haven't learned good skills when you're a kid, you're kind of destined to be a jerk for the rest of your life. And true, is it?
That's right. And the biggest thing that changed him was he started taking responsibility for his behavior. So he realized that he was creating difficulties. Whereas previously he was always blaming other people and it was always someone else's fault. But once he started focusing on what he could control, things started to change quite quickly for him and for everyone else around him.
That's wonderful. Now, obviously, a lot of the people who are listening to us now don't have a lifetime, but more did something yesterday they feel really embarrassed about.
Sure.
It's one of the points we wanted to make in this next slide is that before the explosion, there's often a long period or even a short period of tension building, and you can really make a lot of difference if you take some sensible steps to try and manage the stresses and pressures that you're under. And that first point, know what's freaking you out, is really about how understanding that you and your family and your children are all under so much additional pressure because of COVID. You might have the job that you enjoyed and that gave you money has been taken away. You know, the way that you relax, the exercise that you used to do maybe is disrupted. You can't do the things you wanted to. Maybe you've had to be living now in a very small space on top of each other, and maybe we don't know how long it's going to be. The period of entry into COVID was extremely upsetting, with a lot of bad news delivered day after day. Like, it got worse. It's unpredictably been getting worse for the last few weeks. And hopefully things are stabilizing, but you still have the sense of uncertainty and dramatic change. The routines that people are under have been disrupted, and that's especially terrible for children. You know, they really don't like it. They often have no friends that they can connect with, and, you know, you can try and put them in touch online, but kids can be deprived of exercise, no friends, no stimulation, running around, behaving appallingly. And parents are in this situation where they're suddenly supposed to be primary school teachers at the same point that they're unemployed or maybe working from home, trying to do a demanding job in novel situations. So having that big picture in mind is really important to help you stop from unloading on your family when it's really the big picture that's freaking you out. I mean, I guess that's a starting point. What else do you want to say, Peter? Or
no, I think you've covered it well. The really bizarre thing about the experience we're going through at the moment is that the things that used to be relaxing and reduce our anxiety, like going for a walk or shopping or going to the gym or going to the movies or something, we either can't do now or are sources of new anxiety. So
yeah.
It's a radically different time than it was even a few months ago.
Yeah. And some of these problems could be fixed. Like, if you don't have a good workspace at home, you might, you know, try and set one up. If you can hang a sheet up so your children have somewhere to go where they can be by themselves, or where the adults can go to hide from the children, you know, try and create some private spaces, even if it's really just curtaining off a little nook. That can actually help a lot, especially if you're a family of introverts. And just trying to set up some routines and rhythms and agreements for how you're going to manage the time. But in the long run, when we look at that big picture, there's a lot that we just cannot actually fix. So we have to turn from what psychologists call problem-focused coping to what they call emotion-focused coping, which is dealing with your own emotions. You know, just because the world's going to hell in a handbasket doesn't mean that we have to be shouting and losing our cool and being scary to other people. So you can really try and look at the things that calm you down, not just in an emergency or an explosion, but in day-to-day, and try and grow the toolkit, because a lot of our previous tools, like what Peter said, have been taken away. We can't do the things we used to do. So what are we going to do for the next 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 months, however long, so that we actually have a bit of fun and relaxation? It's useful to think about that, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it also gives us time to think about little things that may get under our skin, like other people in the house may be more or less tidy than us, or they may dominate spaces or things like that. So there's all these little things that can start to amplify when we're locked in together.
Yeah, I want to get to those triggers in a second. Before I do,
okay,
I'll that
sure.
line, if that's okay. Just those things we talked about. Peter talked about knowing your own warning signs when you're starting to lose it. And you do need to go to your room and kind of close the door and take a break if you can. And also knowing what doesn't work. And we'll come back to that at the end. And here again, just limiting your alcohol, because a lot of people might be thinking, you know, I used to relax with my friends over alcohol, but they're not here, but I'll still drink. It's really not the best strategy. Okay, so thinking about those triggers, yeah, I think, Peter, a lot of people have the instinct that if something happens, like, you know, someone's playing the television too loudly, and they just freak out, they just lose it, you know, that it's uncontrollable. But that's not really how it is it?
No, that's right. There's a lot that we can do to manage those triggers. The first most important thing is to build in some time, like we mentioned earlier, to have a think about what it is that's triggering us. Because it may be the sound of the television up too loud, or someone's music taste is not what you like, but the actual thing that's underneath that might be something different. It might be a feeling of being disrespected, or that the other, you know, being annoyed by the other person's behavior for some other reason. So we need to take some time to think about what's going on before we instantly react to that in a way that we
and a good thought experiment that a lot of people talk about is, you know, if your boss or the Prime Minister of Australia or 10 police officers or your mother were in the living room with you when this was happening, you wouldn't be reacting the same way, right? You wouldn't freak out. You wouldn't start screaming and swearing or whatever. And so how would you stop yourself? What's different in that situation? Part of it is you'd be thinking, well, I don't want to get put in jail, but beyond that, you'd be thinking to yourself, okay, I need to calm myself down here. And so you kind of have to accept the situation and understand it's not up to me to escalate. I'm not open to shouting right now. Something annoying is happening. It is what it is. But then I'm going to talk sense to myself about that. And I'm really going to try and understand, is this really important? What perspective can I bring? What if I was a neutral observer? What if I try to take the emotional language out of it? What's really happening? My child's banging something on the wall that's plastic is making a horrible sound and I'm getting a headache. I mean, if you focus on the actions rather than the emotions, sometimes that gives you a wider range of responses. Like you can replace the plastic toy with a plush toy or get some aspirin or Panadol or leave the room to avoid the sound. And I guess that's something that can really be helpful to avoid conflict.
Yeah, that's right. Another strategy which I found helpful for men that I've worked with is what we call the 20-year rule. And that means that is essentially, is this going to matter in 20 years' time?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if somebody's left the milk out of the fridge or if they've left a wet towel on the carpet or something like that. More often than not, it's annoying, but it's not really going to matter in the long run.
Yeah.
But if we lose our cool with someone and we are really abusive towards them, they will remember that in 20 years' time. That's what's going to be the legacy from that moment rather than something that can be easily sorted out.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Good advice. All right, let's move on. Here's some things that people think will work, but evidence shows they're not as cool as you think. So I guess the first one is actually quite hard for people. Like, what about just the idea of avoiding all conflict? Just hold it in. Like even what you just said, right? The towel's on the carpet, it's wet. Instead of having conflict, just hang it up. What's wrong with that? Or how could that be wrong?
I think we still need to address issues that are annoying us, but it's about how we do it, and doing it successfully and peacefully is the ideal way. As we've both mentioned already, it's not always going to be that easy because of the extra stresses that we're carrying and other aspects that are going on in our life that are out of our control. So we want to avoid nasty, hurtful conflict that's going to hurt other people, but we still need to address issues. But we might take a step back during this time for the little things that don't make that much difference.
Yeah. And there's this thing called ruminating, psychologists say, or just dwelling on it, where, you put it aside, but then you're in another room or whatever, you just keep rehearsing. These thoughts just keep coming into your head. You're angry. That's known to increase conflicts, obviously, but how do you stop that? How do you interrupt those dark thoughts that just keep coming back?
There's a few techniques. One really quick one is to put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, which sounds really weird, but I can't do it as I'm talking because it will stop me from talking. But often,
I'm going to practice while you're talking.
Thank you. Yeah. Often, if we're going around and around in circles on this one track of thinking, then our mouths will be silently mouthing those words as well. So just putting our tongue on the roof of our mouth can stop that incessant thinking. There's another thing which psychologists call the ironic rebound effect, and that means that the stronger we try to stop a thought from coming back, the more strongly and more powerfully it will come back. So some people might want to just write things down, and so you move it from that space within your mind where it's just going round and round in circles onto a sheet of paper or onto a booklet or something that you want to write in, and that makes it less abstract. So you can still come back to the issue later, but it'll stop you from building it up into something that that becomes much bigger in our minds than it may be in real life.
Right. And this other point is interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people have an intuition that if you're upset, that what you can do is just kind of get it all out, some vigorous exercise. I've even seen an advice that when you're angry, you should go out and do some boxing, shadow boxing. But in fact, research has shown that can increase conflict, right?
It can increase violence, yeah.
Yeah.
So the research shows the old advice used to be go and punch your pillow or something like that.
Yeah.
what we found was that people are actually rehearsing hitting other people in their minds. So they're not just punching a pillow, they're thinking of the other person. So that's a really dangerous way of managing it.
Yeah, and of course, for the third time, but the last time, I promise you, drinking, not good, increases the risk of alcohol, of violence, but also of unkind words and other negative conflict generally.
That's right.
These bottom points, they may seem really obvious for many of our viewers, but some people think that, if you're feeling really frustrated and say you just shouting, cursing, and maybe punching a wall, that as long as you haven't hit someone, that, it's really okay. And I guess related to that, this idea that if someone else hits you or your child bites you, that's really a reason that it's okay to hit them back.
That's right. We're moving into criminal territory right here. So we have to avoid all of those behaviours at all costs, because there's a risk of some really serious criminal repercussions. Some of the men that I've worked with said they didn't really mean a threat of violence towards someone else, but the court doesn't see it like that. And many of those men have ended up losing contact with their children because of threats that they've made, which they thought were a joke, but nobody else thinks that they're a joke.
Yeah. And even things like smashing something on the floor, like you pick up a plate and throw it down. I mean, that's not criminal behavior, but it can make things worse, right? Because other people get scared and they might respond to that. And more broadly, you frighten your child or frighten your loved one.
That's right. And it also has long-term implications on trusting you again. If you demonstrate really volatile, unpredictable behavior like that, then people will lose trust and lose respect for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just on this final slide here, it's really kind of overview, final content slide. We have some resources after. It just really is talking about what you can do before, during, and after. Do you want to kind of take us through these points?
Yeah, I think it's really important to try to plan this before situations happen. There's a lot that we can do to nip things in the bud before situations develop. So we've mentioned some of these before, like asking how important this is, like the 20-year rule that I mentioned before. Giving people the benefit of the doubt. This isn't when they're behaving in an abusive way, but when there are those minor niggles that might be useful. Letting some things go, although I don't want to.
Yeah, especially with children, right, during this time. But any of us under pressure could be doing something slightly negative. Again, not in the context of an ongoing problem that you need to get help for, but just those little things that that if they had more sleep or they had food, they probably wouldn't be doing it. So
that's right. Yeah, and everyone's under a little bit more stress at the moment, so. Yeah. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the more serious types of behaviour. Staying in touch with your body means that checking in with your body every now and again through the day, just to think about how much stress you're carrying. Some people use a technique called body scanning, where they might every hour check in with their body and say to themselves, okay, where am I holding my stress at the moment? Is it in my neck or my shoulders or in my stomach or wherever? And then do something at that stage to try to manage that stress. So it might be go for a walk around the backyard or around the block, or it might be mindfulness exercise, or it might be listening to music, or it might be playing with the dog or something like that. So constantly keeping in track with the indicators that are coming through your body, and then doing something to reduce your stress through the day, and that can help reduce the build up and the tension that builds up over the day. Often we see these incidents happen later in the day when people are starting to get a bit frayed.
Parents call it the arsenic hour, don't they? At the end.
Yeah.
Everyone's hungry before dinner and tired. And this, Friday nights, end of the work week, everyone's exhausted. Times of conflict and times to be gentle with yourself till everyone's caught up on their sleep, when you can have a conversation about wet towels and so on. That's
right. I've also been told never to get a haircut last appointment of the day as well, because the hairdresser will be tired too. The other aspect to this is talking together and working as a team with your family to try to plan strategies in advance. Like talk about, if I'm a little bit grumpy, can you please let me know so that I can do something about it? If you have particular space needs, like if you're working from home and you've got an important meeting, you need people to be quiet, letting them know rather than snapping at them afterwards. Understanding that everyone will be a little bit different because of the extra stress load that they're carrying at the moment. We used to be able to manage little niggles in the household by going out to work or to school or playing with friends or doing things like that, but we don't have those options available at the moment, so that there will typically be a bit more stress in the house. Also giving some signal when we're starting to feel agitated or overwhelmed. So I worked with a man once who had a ashtray in the house and he would put that on the fridge when he was starting to feel grumpy. He would take responsibility for doing something about that. So he'd go for a walk, but when the ashtray was on the fridge, that let everyone know in the household that he wasn't in a good mood. So he was just letting them know that he's doing something for himself to calm himself down. That's not to say that everyone should go out and buy an ashtray now and do that. You can have some other signal.
Many of us can even speak verbally if you feel like you're able to just say, wow, really tense, I'm going for a walk now.
Exactly, yeah.
Family to know that.
Yeah. Or I just need 15 minutes to listen to some music or whatever it is, play a game or something, just to have a break. So if we can do a lot of that heavy lifting before the incidents, it reduces the likelihood that the incidents will happen as often or as severely. If that doesn't work and we're in the midst of some situation where conflict is about to erupt, trying to short circuit that by using some of the techniques we looked at before, like breathing and distracting and those sorts of things, is really important. So the quicker we get out of that pattern, the better. We might not be able to stop everything, but we can certainly minimize the damage. And it's important to make sure that other people feel safe. So if we don't feel like we can control ourselves, we need to be able to leave the room or leave the house.
And even if you feel like you can control yourself, really, if other people are frightened of you and you can see it in their expression, that's really a time to leave and just take that space so that everyone feels safe, because you may have a sense that you're not going to cross a line, but you've already crossed the line of intimidating, and that's not really okay. That's not good for your family.
That's right, yeah. And some people can get locked into arguments that just go nowhere, and once we start understanding that we're in one of those arguments, it's best to break that and come back at another time and still discuss the topic. One of the common problems people have when they leave situations is they can use that to avoid the issue that the people are talking about and never come back to it. So if we do leave, or we have a timeout, or we go for a walk around the park or something, we need to make sure that we come back to the topic and settle it when we're in a calm situation. But we're not doing anyone any favors if we're angry or frustrated in that.
That's right. And if the behaviors cross the line, even if other people have also done the wrong thing, it's quite good to try and, after that period of reflection, take responsibility and just say, look, I'm sorry for my part in this. You might have also done other things, but I'm sorry for my part in this because I did the wrong thing, and I'm going to repair the damage as well. Because it's not just about running away. I mean, that's the difference, right? It's calming down and then coming back. Yeah.
And taking the effort to look at things from another person's perspective as well. We're so used to our own perspective that sometimes we can overlook where other people are trying to come from.
Yeah. Now, I think on this, point, we're just coming back to the idea, lots of people are having trouble right now with family conflict, and there is a difference when it crosses the line to violence, and you may really find this resource helpful, but there may be a need for a deeper help from professionals. And Australians can use the wonderful resource 1800 Respect, but anyone anywhere in the world can Google I need help family violence. And we've also got some information on the next slide, but sometimes independent of explosions, we've talked about explosions, there can be a kind of long period of sarcasm and controllingness, coerciveness, that's also very damaging and dangerous to the families. So if you want information about that, there's some online at this resource of No to Violence. And on the next slide, we've just got a whole heap of resources. And as well, organizations like Community Stars that Peter works with in Victoria are available, aren't they? Do you have any comments on this point, Peter?
There's lots of really good resources available, certainly in Australia and internationally as well. So people should be able to find help. I think that if they ring any of those numbers, there's highly skilled professionals at the other end of those lines that can provide assistance really effectively.
Yeah, that's right. So at this point, I'd just like to acknowledge, as well as Peter and I, there were a number of others that contributed to the slides and the content. We workshopped over a period of about a week. And you can see the names on the slide here. Peter and I really welcome your feedback. Our team, our whole group welcomes your feedback and questions, and you can send those via email to w.lewis@psy.uq.edu.au. And I'll leave it there, Peter, unless there's something. Would you like to close?
Sure. I just want to remind people to be easy on yourself as well during this time. It's important to take responsibilities, we said, for our own behaviour, but we're living through really extraordinary times at the moment. So it's difficult for everyone, and we just need to do our part to make sure that we all get through this as safely as possible.
Thank you so much.